Story: The silent graveyard. Beginning on the edge of a quiet village, there was an old graveyard. The villagers rarely went there after sunset. They said the wind whispered between the crooked tombstones, as if the dead still had stories to tell. One evening, a curious boy named Arif walked past the graveyard gate. He had always wondered why people feared this place. Middle as the moon rose, Arif stepped inside. The grass was tall, the stones were cracked, and the air felt colder than the rest of the village. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound like someone calling his name. He followed the voice deeper into the graveyard, until he found a grave that looked newer than the others. The name carved on it was faded, but the soil was fresh. The wind grew louder, carrying whispers that seemed to form words. "Remember me." Arif's heart pounded. He realized it was not anger or horror that filled the graveyard, but longing souls waiting to be remembered. Arif knelt and placed a flower he had in his pocket on the lonely grave. The whispers stopped, and the night grew calm again. When he left the graveyard, he no longer felt fear. Instead, he carried a quiet truth. The dead are not frightening, they are only silent until someone remembers them. From that night on, Arif always visited the graveyard with flowers, and slowly, the village stopped fearing it too.
The Silent Graveyard Part 2. Middle approximately equals 1,000 words. Arif stood frozen, his breath quick and shallow. The flower lay on the soil at his feet, its petals glowing faintly in the dim moonlight. He wanted to believe the sound had been the wind, nothing more. Yet his heart whispered otherwise. That voice had carried weight, the kind of weight that no breeze could hold. He looked around. The tombstones stretched like a crowd of silent watchers, their cracked faces turned toward him. The shadows between them seemed darker now, thick enough to hide someone or something. Who's there? He tried again, louder this time. Still no reply. But as he stepped back, his foot pressed into the soil of a newer grave. The ground sank slightly, soft beneath his heel. He stumbled and fell to his knees. His palm landed on the mound of earth, and instantly a chill shot up his arm, colder than ice, sharper than fear. He pulled his hand away, gasping, and then he saw it. The soil moved. Not like the natural settling of dirt, but like something beneath it had shifted. A small ripple, as though fingers were brushing against the underside, searching for escape. Arif scrambled backward, his eyes wide. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused. Something deeper than fear held him there, pinning him like a moth to a flame. The whisper returned, clearer now, rising from the very earth. Remember me. The words seeped into his bones. They were not angry, not threatening, only desperate. A voice heavy with longing, with sorrow. Arif swallowed hard. Who are you? No answer. Only the rustle of grass and the slow, steady sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. He forced himself to stand. His knees trembled, but his curiosity pressed him forward. The grave he had stumbled on was different from the others. Its stone was upright, its carvings not yet erased by time. He squinted at the name. The letters were rough, freshly etched. Samiullah Arif did not know the man. But he remembered hearing his grandmother speak of a villager who had died unexpectedly just months ago. A young man gone too soon. This must have been his resting place. Asterisk. Arif's lips parted, but no words came. The silence pressed in, heavy and thick. He felt as though the entire graveyard was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then came the second sound. Not a whisper this time, but the faintest hum, like a tune, a lullaby half remembered. It drifted through the air, circling the graves, seeping into his ears. It was haunting, yet strangely gentle, like a mother singing her child to sleep. Arif turned in every direction, but he could see no one. Asterisk. The melody pulled him deeper into the graveyard. His legs moved almost without his will. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as though invisible hands pressed against his shoulders, guiding him forward. Asterisk. He passed graves so old their stones had crumbled into dust. He passed trees with twisted branches that scratched against the sky. He passed a broken wall where weeds had grown tall and wild. Asterisk. At last, he reached the farthest corner of the graveyard. Asterisk. There, half hidden by the shadow of an ancient banyan tree, stood a grave unlike the rest. Its stone was taller, carved with strange markings he could not read. Vines crawled up its surface, wrapping it in green. And at its base, the soil was unnaturally dark, as though it had been watered with something other than rain. The humming stopped. Arif's heart thundered. His eyes darted to the roots of the tree, where something glimmered faintly. He knelt, brushing the dirt aside, and uncovered a small object, a pendant, its chain broken. The pendant was round, made of brass, and on its surface was engraved a single word. Though faint, he could still read it: hope. Asterisk. He held it in his hand. The moment he touched it, the wind rose. The branches of the banyan groaned and shook. The graveyard seemed to awaken. Asterisk. Whispers filled the air. Dozens of them, overlapping, rising and falling like waves. Some were too faint to understand, but others were clear. Asterisk. Find me. Asterisk. Do not forget. Asterisk. We are waiting. Asterisk. Arif clutched the pendant tighter. His skin prickled with goosebumps. He wanted to scream, to throw the thing away, to run out of this cursed place. Yet something told him that if he left now, the whispers would never stop, not in the graveyard, not in his mind. Asterisk. Why are you calling me? He shouted into the night. His voice cracked, echoing between the stones. What do you want from me? For a heartbeat, silence, and then a single voice answered, deep, sorrowful, and clear. Asterisk. To be remembered. Asterisk. The words hit Arif like a hammer. His breath caught in his chest. He thought of all the graves he had passed, the names erased, the stones broken, the people forgotten. Was that what this was about? The dead calling out, not for revenge, not to harm the living, but simply to be remembered. Asterisk, his fingers loosened on the pendant. His fear began to shift, melting into something else, something almost like pity. Asterisk, but before he could speak again, the soil at the base of the banyan grave shifted. Slowly, steadily, the earth sank inward. Arif stumbled back, eyes wide. From the darkness, a shape began to rise. Asterisk, it was not flesh, not bone, but shadow-thick and heavy, shaped like a man. The figure lifted its head toward him, and, though it had no face, Arif felt its gaze pierce him. Asterisk, the whispers grew frantic. The air pressed against his chest. He wanted to collapse, to close his eyes, but he couldn't look away. Asterisk, the shadow raised a hand and pointed not at Arif, but at the pendant in his palm. Asterisk, is this yours? Arif whispered, his voice trembling. The figure bowed its head slowly. Arif's heart pounded. The night seemed to spin around him. He realized now that he stood at the heart of the graveyard's mystery, tangled in the voices of the forgotten. Asterisk, and he understood something else. This was no longer about curiosity. Asterisk, this was a calling. The Silent Graveyard, Part 3, ending approximately equals 1,000 words. The pendant burned cold in Arif's hand. Colder than ice, colder than fear itself. The shadow figure stood still, pointing at it, its form shifting like smoke in the night. For a long moment, neither moved. The graveyard itself seemed to hold its breath. Asterisk, Arif swallowed. His voice shook. Asterisk, is this what you wanted me to find? Asterisk, the shadow gave no sound, but slowly lowered its hand, as if to say, yes. The whispers around him quieted, blending into a low hum, like an unseen crowd waiting for his next move. Asterisk, Arif turned the pendant over in his fingers. The word hope shimmered faintly under the moonlight. It looked fragile, old, and yet powerful, as if it carried not just metal, but memory. Whose memory? Samuela's, perhaps. Or did it belong to someone else? Someone from the grave beneath the banyan tree. Asterisk, why me? Arif whispered. Why are you calling me, and not anyone else? Asterisk, for the first time, the shadow's form shifted closer, leaning forward as if it wished to speak. And though its lips did not move, its voice poured into Arif's mind, heavy and sorrowful. Asterisk, because you listen. Asterisk, Arif's breath caught. He thought of the villagers who avoided the graveyard, who crossed the path quickly, who never spared a thought for the names carved into the stones. He thought of how everyone feared this place and kept it silent, burying not just bodies, but memories. Maybe the dead had cried for years, for decades, for centuries. No one had dared to hear, except him. The whispers rose again, louder, desperate. Asterisk, remember me. Asterisk, tell our stories. Asterisk, do not let us fade. Asterisk, the sound pressed into Arif's chest, making it hard to breathe. He fell to his knees, clutching the pendant tight. His heart pounded so fast it hurt. Asterisk, I can't remember all of you. He cried, I don't even know who you are. Asterisk, the voices hushed, and then the same sorrowful tone filled his ears. Asterisk, not all. Just begin. Asterisk, Arif blinked, his chest heaving. Just begin. That was all they wanted, not perfection, not everything, just a start. Someone to speak, someone to remember, someone to carry their names past the silence. Asterisk, slowly, he stood again. His fear was still there, but it had changed. No longer the fear of death or ghosts, it was the fear of responsibility, of carrying something too heavy for his young shoulders. And yet, he could not turn away now. Asterisk, he stepped closer to the shadow. If I take this pendant, he said, what happens? Asterisk, the shadow's form wavered, then bent low, bowing to him. The gesture was clear. Acceptance, gratitude. Asterisk, the wind shifted. The banyan's branches rustled. For the first time since he had entered, Arif felt warmth touch the air. Asterisk, he closed his fist around the pendant. I'll remember you, he whispered. I'll tell others. You won't be forgotten. Asterisk, the shadow straightened. Its faceless head tilted upward toward the stars. And then, slowly, its form began to dissolve, drifting upward like smoke caught in the breeze. One by one, the other whispers faded with it. Soft sighs carried into the night. Asterisk, the graveyard grew silent. But it was a different kind of silence, now peaceful, not heavy. Still, not suffocating. Asterisk, Arif looked down at the soil. The dark patch at the base of the grave was still there, but no longer shifting. It looked still, settled, as it should. He let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Asterisk, the walk back to the village felt longer than usual. The pendant weighed heavily in his pocket, as though it carried not metal, but promises. Every few steps, he looked over his shoulder, half expecting the shadow to follow him. But the graveyard stayed quiet behind him, the moonlight washing the stones in pale silver. Asterisk, when he reached home. His grandmother was waiting by the door, her eyes sharp with worry. Asterisk, where were you? She scolded. Do you know how late it is? Asterisk, Arif hesitated, then looked down at the pendant in his hand. For a moment, he considered telling her everything the whispers, the shadow, the plea to be remembered. But when he saw the fear in her eyes, he chose silence, not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he realized that stories had their own time to be told. Asterisk, I was just walking, he said softly. Asterisk, his grandmother sighed, shook her head, and guided him inside. That night, lying on his mat, Arif held the pendant tightly. He could still feel the faint echo of voices in his ears, but they were no longer cries. They were calm, like a river finally finding its course. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, I'll remember. Asterisk, and, for the first time, the graveyard outside his village no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like a place of waiting, a library of lives, silent until someone chose to open its doors. Weeks passed. Arif began visiting the graveyard regularly. At first, villagers scolded him, saying it was dangerous. But soon, they noticed a change. The boy, who once only asked questions, now carried answers. He began cleaning the graves, reading aloud the names carved into the stones, placing flowers on those long forgotten. Sometimes he even sat there for hours, telling stories he had heard from the elders, so the dead would not be alone. Asterisk, and slowly, something shifted in the village. Asterisk's children, curious about Arif's bravery, began to follow him. Men and women who once avoided the graveyard started to visit, leaving offerings of flowers, water, and prayers. The place that was once feared grew calm, its silence no longer threatening, but sacred. It was as though the graveyard itself sighed in relief. Arif never spoke of the shadow, nor of the night the whispers first called his name. But he carried the pendant always hidden under his shirt, close to his heart, and when he touched it, he remembered the promise he had made beneath the banyan tree. Asterisk, to remember, to tell the stories, to give hope to the forgotten. Years later, when Arif had grown into a man, villagers often wondered why the graveyard had changed, why it no longer felt cursed, why the air there was no longer heavy. They said it was because the boy had shown respect, because he had not feared the dead, but embraced their memory. Asterisk, and though no one knew the full truth, Arif carried it silently with him, like a secret shared only between him and the shadows. Asterisk, for he knew what the graveyard had taught him that night. The dead are not frightening. They are only silent asterisk until someone remembers them. The Silent Graveyard, Part 4, Epilogue, approximately equals 1,000 words. Years passed, and Arif grew into a man of wisdom. The pendant of brass, with the single word hope, never left his neck. Time weathered its edges, but its meaning only grew stronger. For Arif, It was not just an ornament. It was a reminder of a night that had changed everything when the silence of the graveyard had spoken. And he had chosen to listen. Asterisk, the graveyard itself had changed too. Where once it had been shunned, now it became a place of quiet respect. The villagers no longer rushed past its gates. They brought flowers on Fridays, cleaned the weeds from forgotten corners, and taught their children to bow their heads before the resting stones. It was not fear that guided them now, but reverence. Asterisk, but peace, Arif knew, was fragile. Asterisk, one rainy season, a storm struck the village. The river swelled and overflowed, drowning the fields. The floodwaters rose so high that they reached the edge of the graveyard. Many tombstones cracked and the soil shifted. When the water finally receded, Arif walked through the damage, his heart heavy. Asterisk, he found bones exposed in the mud, names washed clean from stones, graves swallowed by earth. The sight shook him. All the work he had done, the memory he had tried to preserve, could vanish so easily under the force of nature. Asterisk, that night, as he sat under the banyan tree where he had once heard the whispers, Arif clutched the pendant and prayed. Asterisk, tell me what to do, he whispered into the dark. How do I protect your memory if even the earth betrays you? The air stirred. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faint and fragile, a whisper rose from the soil. Asterisk build. Asterisk, Arif froze. The word echoed inside him, simple but powerful. Build. Asterisk, the next day, he called the villagers together. He spoke with a voice firm and steady, carrying the weight of years. The storm has shown us how easily memory can be lost. We must not leave this place to crumble again. We must build a wall, a garden, a place where our dead will not only rest but be remembered. Asterisk, at first, the villagers hesitated. Building would cost time, effort, money. But Arif's eyes burned with conviction, and one by one, hearts shifted. He is right, said the elders. The graveyard is no longer a place of fear. It is part of us. If we care for the living, we must also care for the dead. Asterix. So they worked. Days turned into weeks as men brought stones, women planted flowers, and children carried water. Slowly, the graveyard transformed. A strong wall rose around it. Paths were laid between the graves. Trees were planted, their shade softening the harsh sun. A small shelter was built at the entrance where visitors could rest and pray. Asterisk, and at the heart of it all, under the ancient banyan tree, Arif placed a stone of his own, not a grave marker, but a monument. On it, he carved a single word, remember. Asterisk, years later, Travelers passing through Nandupur would stop to rest at the graveyard garden. They would marvel at its peace, its beauty, and ask how such a place had been born. The villagers would smile and say, "Because once the dead asked us not to forget." Asterisk, by then, Arif was an old man, his hair white, his hands lined with age. Yet his eyes still shone with the same fire of that curious boy, who had dared to enter the graveyard one moonlit night, asterisk on his final evening. As the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, Arif sat beneath the banyan tree. He held the pendant one last time and whispered, "I kept my promise." Asterisk, the wind stirred gently, warm against his cheek. And though no one else heard it, Arif smiled, for he knew the whispers were still there. Softer now, peaceful. Asterisk, when he closed his eyes for the last time, the village mourned him deeply. They buried him in the graveyard he had saved, beside the banyan tree. Beneath the monument that read, "Remember," asterisk, and 4 generations after, children were told the story of the boy who had listened to the dead, who carried their voices, and who taught the living that silence is not emptiness, but waiting. Asterisk, the graveyard never returned to shadow. It remained a place of memory, of hope, of quiet truth. Asterisk, and on certain moonlit nights, when the wind rustled through the trees, the villagers swore they could hear whispers, still not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Asterisk. The Silent Graveyard Part 5 Legacy approximately equals 1,000 words. Decades had passed since Arif's death. The banyan tree under which he rested had grown even larger, its roots snaking through the soil, its branches spreading wide like a guardian's arms. The monument that bore the single word "Remember" still stood firm, though moss crept around its edges, and beside it lay Arif's grave, marked simply with his name, no titles, no praise, just a boy who had once listened when no one else would. Asterisk, the villagers never forgot him. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, families gathered at the graveyard. They brought flowers, lit lanterns, and told stories not only of Arif, but of all those who rested there. The graveyard had become more than a burial ground. It was a living memory, a place where past and present met, where silence spoke as loudly as words. But time has a way of testing memory. One generation passed, then another. Children who had once heard stories of Arif grew old themselves. New faces filled the village, and new worries came: schools, markets, roads, machines. The graveyard, though respected, no longer drew the same devotion. The flowers came less often. The paths grew dusty. The walls cracked asterisk until one boy, much like Arif, began to wander near it again. Asterisk. His name was Rihan, 12 years old. curious and stubborn, with a mind too restless to accept simple answers. He had heard bits and pieces of the legend of Arif, the boy who had spoken with the dead. But adults brushed it off when he asked. Just a story, they said. Something the old folks made up. Yet Rihan felt otherwise. Whenever he walked past the graveyard, the pendant that hung around his neckarif's old pendant of hope, passed down through generations, seemed to grow colder, as if it recognized the place. One evening, while the village prepared for a festival, Rihan slipped away. He walked the familiar path, past the fields, through the narrow lane, until the iron gate of the graveyard creaked before him. The pendant trembled lightly against his chest. Inside, the place looked tired. Weeds sprouted between stones. Some graves leaned untended, but the banyan tree still stood tall, unshaken, its shadow stretching long under the fading sun. Rihan walked slowly, his heart both nervous and excited. He stopped before the monument that read "Remember" and traced the carved letters with his fingers. Is it true? He whispered into the quiet. Did you really speak to him? The wind stirred, leaves rustled above, and in that moment the silence of the graveyard deepened, not empty, but waiting, just as it had been in Arif's time. Rihan's breath caught. He clutched the pendant. The word hope glinted faintly in the dim light, and though no one else was there, he felt it soft, faint, like a sigh against his ear. Yes. His eyes widened. He spun around, but saw nothing. Only stones, only trees. Yet the voice was clear as the night. Who are you? Rihan whispered, his voice trembling. One who was remembered. One who waits for others to remember again. Rihan's heart raced. He realized then that the promise Arif had made had not ended with his death. It was not the duty of one boy alone. It was a chain, a legacy passed from one soul to another, from one generation to the next. The dead were never silent. They were only waiting for listeners. The pendant grew warmer in his hand. No longer cold, but pulsing, alive, as if beating with two hearts, his own, and the countless voices it carried. Rihan swallowed. Then I'll listen, he said firmly. Like he did, I'll remember you. The wind blew stronger, rustling every leaf of the banyan, echoing like applause. The silence lifted, filled not with fear, but with quiet joy. And in that moment, the boy knew this was his path. From that night onward, Rihan visited the graveyard often. He cleaned the stones, lit small lamps, and wrote down the names he could still read. Where the names had vanished, He left markers of flowers so that no grave was truly forgotten. Children began to follow him, curious about his work, and soon he was telling them the story of Arif not as myth, but as truth. Asterisk, the graveyard once again stirred with life. Not of the living bodies, but of a living memory. And though the whispers were faint, they grew stronger with every name spoken, every prayer offered, every story told. The cycle had begun anew. And so the graveyard stood, not as a place of fear, but as a bridge between the living and the dead, between silence and memory, between what is lost and what is kept alive. Asterisk, the pendant of hope remained, passed from Arif to Rihand, and destined to pass further still, as long as there were hearts willing to listen. For the dead are never truly gone. They wait in silence until someone remembers. The Silent Graveyard Asterisk, Part 6. The Awakening approximately equals 1,000 words. Asterisk Rihan's visits to the graveyard became routine. Not an act of bravery anymore, but a part of life. At first, children mocked him, saying he was wasting time among the dead. But when he began telling them stories of Arif, of forgotten names, of villagers long gone, they listened. Slowly, laughter turned into curiosity. Soon, young voices could be heard, repeating the stories at night, asking their parents, who was this person? What happened to them? And so, memory spread like fire catching dry grass. But memory alone was not enough. Rehan felt it every time he touched the pendant. Its faint warmth carried a strange urgency, like a heart beating faster than his own, as if the souls were restless again, waiting for something greater. Asterisk, one night, when the moon was high and the graveyard bathed in silver, Rehan dreamed. In his dream, he stood under the banyan tree, but instead of the quiet graves, he saw endless rows of shadows stretching far beyond the village, countless figures, faceless and silent, waiting. Their silence was heavy, yet not empty. Asterisk, he clutched the pendant, and the shadows raised their heads as one. Remember us, they whispered, not just here, everywhere. Asterisk, Rehan awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. For the first time, he understood the graveyard of Nandupur was only the beginning. The silence of the dead was not bound by walls or villages. It stretched across lands, across time. Everywhere, forgotten voices longed to be remembered. Asterisk, the thought terrified him. He was only a boy, just as Arif once was. How could he carry so many voices? Asterisk, yet when he held the pendant, it pulsed warmly, as though reminding him, you are not alone. Begin. The next morning, Rehan spoke to the elders. We must write down the stories, not only here, but beyond. Every village, every graveyard. We must remember them all. Asterisk, the elders frowned. That is too great a task for us. Our lives are busy. Why burden ourselves with the past? Asterisk, but Rayhan did not give up. He began keeping a book, an old notebook with torn pages, where he wrote the names he found, the tales he heard from old villagers, even small details like a farmer's favorite song or a mother's lullaby. At first, it was just his private work, but soon children added their scribbles, parents added their memories. The book thickened, not with grand history, but with simple truths of lives once lived. Asterisk, and with every page. The pendant grew warmer. One evening, while Rayhan sat by a grave writing in his notebook, a stranger entered the village. He was a traveler, dusty from long roads, carrying little more than a worn satchel. Curious, he asked where he might find water. Rayhan led him to the well, and as they walked, the stranger noticed the notebook. Asterisk, what are you writing, boy? He asked. Stories, Rayhan said simply. Stories of what? Asterisk, the dead. Asterisk, the traveler raised his brow. And why waste ink on the dead? Asterisk, Rayhan closed the notebook carefully. Because if we don't remember them, we will forget ourselves too. Asterisk, the traveler stared at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You are wiser than you look. Asterisk, that night, the traveler asked to see the graveyard. Rayhan guided him under the banyan tree, showed him the monument, and told him the story of Arif. The stranger listened quietly, his eyes glimmering in the lantern light. Asterisk, when Rayhan finished. The man whispered, I have wandered many lands, and I have never heard a tale like this. Perhaps your work is greater than you think. Asterisk, he left the next morning, but not before copying a few pages of Rayhan's notebook into his own. Months later, other travelers came. Some had heard of the boy who kept the voices of the dead alive. Some wanted to see the graveyard garden themselves, and slowly the story of Nandapur spread beyond the hills, carried by merchants, pilgrims, wanderers. Asterisk, Rehan did not seek fame, but it found him, and with it came responsibility. Asterisk, the whispers in his dreams grew louder. Not only voices from his village, but voices from places he had never seen, distant lands, unknown graves, forgotten souls. The pendant grew heavier, as though filled with their weight. Asterisk, at times. Rayhan wanted to throw it away, to return to a simple life. But whenever he thought of giving up, he remembered Arif, a boy who had stood alone in the darkness and chosen to listen. Asterisk, if Arif had begun, then Rayhan must continue. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Rayhan gathered the children under the banyan tree. His notebook lay open in his lap, Asterisk, do you know why we write these names? He asked them. To remember, one child said. Yes, Rihan nodded. But also because remembering gives hope. Hope that no one is ever truly gone as long as their story is told. That is what the pendant means. He held it up, and the word hope, glimmer, asterisk. The children's eyes shone. Some leaned closer, whispering among themselves. And in their eagerness, Rihan saw the truth. The legacy was not his alone. Just as Arif had passed it to him, he too would pass it on. Asterisk, the whispers stirred again. Not desperate now, but calm, almost joyful. The graveyard breathed, alive with memory. Asterisk, and as the moon rose, Rihan knew the awakening had begun. The silence of the dead would not remain confined to Nandupur. It would echo wherever there were hearts willing to listen. The Silent Graveyard, Part 7. The journey approximately equals 1,000 words. The seasons turned, and with them, Rihan grew. He was no longer the small boy who had first wandered into the silent graveyard. His shoulders had broadened, his gaze sharpened, but the same fire of curiosity and duty burned within him. The notebook he carried was now thick, its pages filled with names, dates, and fragments of lives once forgotten. Asterisk, yet the voices did not grow quiet. If anything, they multiplied. Every night in his dreams, Rihan saw new faces, men and women from faraway lands. Children who had died too young, elders who had lived full lives but were now buried in unmarked graves. Their whispers pressed against his mind. Come to us. Remember us. Asterisk, it was clear. His path no longer belonged only to Nandupur. He had to leave. The night he made the decision. He stood once more under the banyan tree, pendant warm against his chest. He spoke aloud, as if to Arif himself. Asterisk, you began this. You showed me the way. But the voices go beyond these fields, beyond this village. I must follow them. I must carry this light further. Asterisk, a breeze stirred the branches, almost as though the tree approved. When Rihan told the villagers, there was silence at first. Then came protest. Asterisk, you are too young. Asterisk, the world beyond is dangerous. Asterisk, this is your home. Why wander where no one knows you? Asterisk, but Rihan only smiled. This village is where the story began. But stories do not live if they stay locked in one place. They must travel just as people do. Asterisk, in the end, they could not stop him. The pendant and the notebook were his to carry. And so, one crisp morning, with little more than a satchel and his endless resolve, Rihan set out along the dusty road that wound away from Nandupur. The journey was not easy. Days stretched into weeks, and Rihan often slept beneath trees or in abandoned huts. He met kind strangers who shared bread, and thieves who tried to steal his belongings. More than once, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and loneliness pressed heavily on his heart. Asterisk, but whenever he touched the pendant, warmth spread through him, steady and strong. And when he opened his notebook to read the names, he remembered he was never truly alone. Asterisk, in every town he passed, he visited the graveyards. Some were well kept, with flowers and candles glowing softly. Others were desolate, broken stones sinking into weeds. Rihan always knelt, always whispered the same words. Asterisk, you are remembered. Asterisk, and sometimes, just as in Nandopur, he heard the faintest sigh of relief carried in the wind. News of the graveyard boy began to spread. In one village, he was called the keeper of names. Many dismissed him as a dreamer, but some welcomed him with reverence. They brought their children to him, asking him to tell the story of Arif, and when Rihan spoke, people wept not out of fear, but out of comfort. For his words reminded them that the dead were never gone as long as memory endured. Asterisk, yet the voices did not let him rest. The farther he went, the louder they grew, like a great chorus calling him toward some distant place. The pendant grew heavier each day, pulling him onward like a compass. One stormy night, Rihan found shelter in the ruins of an old temple. As lightning split the sky, he lit a lantern and opened his notebook to write. But before his pen touched the page, he heard Iten, unmistakable whisper, stronger than ever before. Asterisk, you carry us well, child, but the journey is not yours alone. Seek others. Share the burden. Asterisk, Rihan froze. The voice was not just one, but many, layered together, like 1,000 echoes speaking in unison. His heart pounded. He had always believed it was his duty alone, but now he understood. The legacy was too great for one soul. Asterisk, he whispered back. Then, where do I find them? Who will listen as I do? Asterisk, the flame of his lantern flickered, and in its trembling glow, he saw an image etched in his mind gathering of people. Not one, not two, but many, standing around a fire, each holding a book like his, each wearing a pendant of light. Asterisk, the vision vanished, but its meaning remained clear. Asterisk, Rihan's task was not simply to remember. It was to awaken others, to build a brotherhood of listeners. The storm passed, and with dawn came new resolve. Rihan knew now where his journey led. Not merely to graves, not merely to towns, but to hearts willing to share the burden. To build something greater than himself. Asterisk, he rose, tightened his satchel, and stepped back onto the road. His steps were lighter, though the pendant hung heavy. For the first time, the weight did not feel like a curse. It felt like a promise. Somewhere ahead lay those who would join him, and, as he walked, the voices no longer sounded like pleas for help. They sounded like a song, an endless hymn of memory, rising with the wind. The Silent Graveyard *, Part 8, The Brotherhood. Approximately equals 1,000 words *. Rihan's journey stretched into years. His boyish face sharpened into youth, his hands calloused from endless roads. Yet his eyes still carried that same searching light. Everywhere he went, he listened. In small towns, he wrote down names from crumbling gravestones. In bustling cities, he found neglected cemeteries hidden behind walls of concrete. In villages, by rivers, he sat with the oldest grandmothers, recording the songs of their youth. But as the notebook filled, so too did the weight on his soul. The whispers multiplied, pressing harder. Some nights he could barely sleep, for the voices would not stop. He longed for help for another who might carry even a fraction of the silence with him. And then, one evening, he found her. It was in a coastal town where the sea roared endlessly against the cliffs. Rihan had gone there, chasing a whisper that tugged at his dreams. He walked into the town's graveyard, battered by salt and wind, where tombstones leaned like weary sailors. There, kneeling by a half-buried grave, was a girl not much younger than him. Her hands were stained with soil as she cleared the weeds away. She did not notice him at first, whispering softly to the stone. Rihan froze. The words she spoke were not prayers, but promises to remember, promises to return. When she finally looked up, her eyes widened. "Who are you?" "I could ask the same," Rihan replied. She studied him for a long moment, then noticed the pendant around his neck. The word hope glimmered faintly. Slowly, she reached under her tunic and drew out a pendant of her own. His breath caught. Hers bore the word faith. Her name was Layla. She told him she had always felt drawn to graveyards, just as he had. Since childhood, she had heard whispers others could not hear. Her pendant had been her grandmother's, who claimed it was older still. Rihan felt a shiver. It was as if the voices had guided him here not by chance, but by design. Together, they compared notes. Rihan showed her his thick book of names. Layla revealed a smaller journal filled with poems and fragments she had written after listening to the whispers. The pages hummed with the same longing, the same quiet hope. For the first time, Rihan did not feel alone. The two traveled onward together. Where one grew weary, the other gave strength. Where one faltered, the other steadied. and soon they discovered more. Asterisk, in a mountain village. They met Yusuf, a shepherd who wore a pendant marked memory. Asterisk, in a desert town. They found Amina, a healer whose pendant bore compassion. Asterisk, in a forest settlement. They found Harun, a woodcutter who carried justice. Asterisk, each one had lived thinking they were alone, cursed by whispers no one else could hear. But when they met Rehan and Layla, they realized their callings were bound together. One night, under a canopy of stars, the five of them sat around a fire in a clearing. Their pendants glowed faintly, each with its own word, each humming with the same energy. Asterisk, Rehan opened his notebook, laying it before them. This began in my village, with one boy named Arif. He carried the silence of the dead until I took it from him. But now I see was never meant for one person alone. It was meant for all of us. Asterisk. Layla nodded, and perhaps for others yet to come. Pendants scattered across lands, waiting for those who can listen. Asterisk, Yusuf added softly, we are not just listeners. We are guardians. We keep the forgotten alive. Asterisk and Amina whispered, we are a brotherhood. Asterisk. The word hung in the air, carried by the crackle of the fire. The brotherhood of silence. From that night on, they traveled not alone, but together. In every town, they sought forgotten graves, cleaned stones, spoke names aloud. They wrote down the stories, shared them with children, built small circles of remembrance wherever they went. And wherever they worked, the whispers grew lighter not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Asterisk, the brotherhood became known across lands. Some feared them, calling them mad. Others honored them, offering food and shelter. But no matter the reaction, they did not stop. Asterisk, the pendants glowed brighter when they were together, as though resonating with one another. Sometimes, when they placed all 5 pendants in a circle, the whispers ceased completely, replaced by a stillness so profound it felt holy. Asterisk. It was then they realized something deeper. Their work was not only for the dead. It was for the living, too. Every act of remembrance reminded the living of their own place in the great chain of memory. Asterisk. Yet not all were pleased. In one city, powerful men accused them of disturbing the order. Why stir the past? The dead should remain silent. Guards threatened them. Stones were thrown. But Rehan and his companions stood firm. Asterisk silence is not forgetting, Rehan declared. It is the ground upon which memory grows. To erase the dead is to erase ourselves. Asterisk, their courage inspired many, even in places where they were unwelcome. Slowly, a quiet movement began to spread, not just 5 wanderers, but dozens, then hundreds, carrying notebooks, whispering names, lighting candles in forgotten places. The Brotherhood had begun to awaken the world. Asterisk, and yet, Rihan knew their journey was far from over. The voices still called, louder and deeper, as though guiding them towards some great truth hidden beyond all the graveyards they had seen. Asterisk, but he was no longer afraid. For he was not alone. The Brotherhood walked with him, and together they carried the silence as both burden and blessing. The Silent Graveyard, Part 9. The trial approximately equals 1,000 words. The Brotherhood of Silence had grown. No longer just 5 wanderers. They were now followed by many. Villagers and travelers joined them, carrying lanterns and notebooks, eager to write down names, eager to speak aloud the forgotten. What began as whispers in one graveyard had become a rising movement that stretched across mountains and rivers. Asterisk, but with growth came fear, and with fear came opposition. The trouble began in the city of Darvash, a sprawling place of stone walls and markets that never slept. The Brotherhood arrived with their usual work, cleaning the abandoned graveyard outside the city, restoring names carved into broken tombstones. Crowds gathered, curious. Some wept with gratitude as they heard forgotten stories retold. But not everyone was pleased. The city's rulers, men in rich robes with eyes sharp as daggers, summoned Rihan and the others. Asterisk, you spread unrest. One declared, asterisk, you stir emotions best left buried. Another accused, asterisk, the dead have no place among the living, said the third. We forbid your work here. Asterisk, Rihan bowed his head, but did not yield. We do not stir unrest. We bring peace to the dead and to the living who remember them. Asterisk, but his words were dismissed. Guards forced them from the graveyard, barred its gates, and threatened punishment should they return. That night, the Brotherhood sat together in a dim tavern. The air was heavy with smoke and doubt. Asterisk, Yusuf clenched his fists. We should fight. The people need us. If rulers fear memory, then we must defy them. Asterisk, Amina shook her head. Violence will taint everything we've built. The silence we carry is sacred, not a weapon. Asterisk, Layla's eyes were troubled. But what if they destroy the graves? What if everything we worked for is erased? Asterisk, for the first time, the group fell into sharp disagreement. Harun, usually calm, slammed his hand on the table. If we do nothing, we fail the dead. If we fight, we fail ourselves. What path remains? Asterisk, Rihan sat quietly, pendant glowing faintly against his chest. He could feel the weight of the voices pressing on him harder than ever before. Their whispers were restless, urgent, yet unclear. He closed his eyes and spoke softly. Asterisk, we are being tested. The others looked at him. The silence we carry is fragile. If we turn it into anger, it will shatter. But if we bow too low, the world will bury it again. We must find another Wayne, either violence nor surrender. Asterisk, but even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. What way was there? The next day, matters grew worse. A mob gathered outside the tavern, shouting accusations. Some claimed the Brotherhood practiced dark magic. Others feared the whispers, saying the group was cursed. Stones were hurled, windows shattered. Asterisk, the Brotherhood fled through narrow alleys, chased by cries of hatred. They found refuge in a half-ruined chapel outside the city, where they collapsed in exhaustion. Asterisk, Layla trembled. What if they're right? What if we are cursed? Asterisk, no, Amina said firmly, though her own eyes brimmed with fear. We are healers, not destroyers. Asterisk, Yusuf snarled. Then why do they see us as monsters? Asterisk, Rihan rose slowly. He walked to the broken altar of the chapel and placed his pendant upon it. The faint glow filled the room with soft light. Asterisk, because they do not understand, he said. And fear always hunts what it cannot understand. Asterisk, he turned back to his companions. But fear is also a test for us and for them. If we endure, if we remain true, then the silence will guide us through. He stood once more beneath the great banyan tree of Nandupur, though he had not seen it in years. The roots coiled like guardians. The branches stretched wide, and from the shadows stepped a figure Arif. His face was calm, his eyes gentle. The trial is not in the hatred of others, he said. It is in your own hearts. Will you let division scatter you, or will you carry the silence together? Asterisk Rayhan reached out, but the figure faded, leaving only the whisper of leaves. Remember. He woke with tears on his face, the pendant warm against his chest. Asterisk, the next day, he gathered the Brotherhood. Asterisk, I saw him, Rihan whispered. I saw Arif. They listened, silent. He told me the trial is not what others do to us. It is whether we stay true to each other. Asterisk, one by one, the others lowered their heads. The anger in Yusuf's eyes softened. Layla's fear eased. Amina and Harun exchanged weary but resolute nods. We are still one, Layla said quietly. Yes, Rihan agreed, and we must remain one, no matter what the world throws at us. The Brotherhood left Darvash soon after, their names stained by rumor, their work forbidden within the city walls. But though they had lost a battle, they had passed the greater trial dash unity. Asterisk on the road beyond the city. They stopped atop a hill and looked back at the towers of stone. Rihan raised his pendant high. Asterisk, let them silence us if they wish, he said. We will carry the silence farther to places where it will be heard. The dead do not belong to rulers or mobs. They belong to memory, and memory belongs to all. Asterisk, the pendants of the others glowed in answer. Faint lights against the fading sky. The Brotherhood walked on, stronger, tested, unbroken.